Okay, calving season. Really, a lot of it has wrapped up. Did you see any major hurdles or themes or something that was consistently going on during calving this year for your producers?
I don't think I saw more of anything than normal. If anything, the good weather has really helped. There's just been less issues overall, maybe a little bit of an uptick in coccidiosis in some herds in comparison to other years. In terms of actual calving problems that like I had to attend to, some people experienced a higher rate of twins. I don't know if it's just because there was less early embryonic loss because we had a nice fall or why in particular. Um, we've had a few strange things happen here for sure, like usual, but nothing that out of the ordinary for us.
When you said that about, some instances of triplets and so forth, did you read the article about a farm family in North Dakota had quintuplets out of a cow?
I
Uh,
didn't I
okay,
didn't see that.
Is that 5 or
five. That's
6?
five.
5?
And there was a
That's crazy.
quadruplets in a 5-year-old red Angus in Nebraska this year as well. So
Payday.
what's the probability that's going to happen? I feel like it's extremely low.
Pretty pretty low. I mean, twins are fairly high. I've only maybe actually assisted. I've had clients have triplets on occasion. It's pretty rare. I've only assisted with one or two. I ultrasound. I do bovine fetal age and sex ultrasound, so we ultrasound really early as opposed to people who just preg check with an ultrasound, and we're looking for, the age and the sex. So we're looking at very small fetuses where you can find the multiples. And I don't think I've ever found triplets. I think Andy has it once or twice, but I don't think I've ever even found triplets. So it's not a very common, even early pregnancy, because there's two things. Do you conceive triplets? And then do you carry the triplets to fruition? And I would say there's definitely far more cows that probably conceive triplets and resorb one of the fetuses or lose the pregnancy altogether than cows that go all the way through with a triplet pregnancy even. And a quad or quint is very rare. I know it's more common in dairy cattle for a variety of reasons, but you really don't see them very often in beef cattle. And in fact, I have what may be a resorbed twin in a jar here. I have something cool to show you if you guys
Oh,
want.
if you've got
Ooh.
cool science fair project props, bring them on. What do you got?
So a client called one of our veterinarians and said, my cow calved, and she pushed something else out. And I thought it was a second twin because it was black and white and covered in hair, but it's just a ball. It looks like a small basketball or like between a basketball and a grapefruit. What is it? So these are fairly common. They're just kind of misaligned. They're cells that just don't go through all the way. And so we actually cross-sectioned it this morning. We kept it in the freezer and we cross-sectioned it as a group this morning. I took some x-rays of it. Some of these are really cool. They get teeth and stuff in. This one
Ooh.
just had a single vertebrae in the middle, but they are just kind of like a twin that didn't form correctly. And so they just turn into a basketball and then come out with everything else. Um, at least that's my understanding. And so this
Wow.
is the cross-section. So you can see the center there.
Yeah.
I
Hmm.
keep a lot of stuff in formalin jars in my office. And then if you look real close, that center bit there is actually bone. And then there's hair on the top. You can see the back side of the other one. And
Yep.
then when I turn it around, so I've got both cross sections. We put it on the bandsaw this morning, and you can actually see the little umbilical cord
Crazy.
coming off of it.
Holy
So I
cow.
thought that was worth sharing with you guys. Yeah, one of our doctors actually got the client to save it, which we appreciated. And there's nothing wrong with the cow. It's just a random thing that happens. It doesn't mean that like anybody's sick or anything. They pass
Right.
these without incident generally. Andy did say he saw one that was incredibly large that was in a cow with a ruptured uterus, and that did result in the death of the cow. But that was a very extreme situation, and usually these things are no big deal. It probably happens a little more than we think, but truthfully, they probably just like, if they do it on pasture or something, they probably get eaten by coyotes and no one ever knows. I've always hoped to find one with teeth. I haven't yet, but like it'll go on my wall when we do. I have a lot of things
Oh,
that I collect just for educational purposes to make sure that producers understand what they're seeing. I have a lot of little specimens I keep.
Suddenly, a field
fascinating.
trip to her office just got better.
Wow, man.
Oh, that's awesome. I did not know that you would be able to keep something like that and would use it, like you said, for educational purposes. And thank you for sharing that. That was very cool. For those who didn't get to see it, go to our live stream on Facebook, YouTube, Acres TV. You're going to want to take a look at that.
Well,
What
I
Emily
think that
described.
leads into a question here. I mean, I think that's pretty odd and weird, but it didn't seem like too big of a deal over there for you, Dr. Fox. So what's the weirdest thing that you've come across or a situation or I guess really anything? What's the weirdest thing you've seen on the job?
I mean, I see a lot of weird stuff. I've definitely seen some deformed calves that were strange. I've had a schistosomus reflexus, which is a calf. I had never had one up until I told a student that I had never had one. And then that week, the student and I saw two of them. So just kind of like a weird thing. You should never say that you haven't had something you don't want to see happen. But Andy, my other half, who's also a veterinarian, he actually saw one for his first calving ever as a vet. And the farmer called and they said, there's all these little intestines coming out of the cow. I think the cow has ruptured. Well, actually, they were the calf's intestines, and their schistosomus reflexus is an inside-out calf. They're not entirely inside out, but they're not
What?
like a hernia where the guts have just come out. Like they
Right.
have a lot of guts on the outside. Sometimes the heart will be on the outside as well. Um, and a lot of the time too, the spine is malformed, and you have to do a C-section or a fetotomy to remove them from the cow. But the weirdest thing this year, I think, would probably be what happened to Dr. Alex, Dr. Presser, who's our newest veterinarian. This is her first year out of school, and thank goodness she handled this well, and somebody came and helped her as well. But she actually ended up with conjoined twins that she C-sectioned out this year, and
Oh.
they
Wow.
weren't just normal conjoined twins; they were actually conjoined at the sternum, like yin and yang,
Oh
right
my
here.
gosh. Yeah.
They were pretty cool, and she's very good with calvings, even though she's new out of school. She has a lot of experience, and she right away recognized that something was not right. Like everything was where it should be. The calf was not too big to come out, and yet it felt like it was just stuck. Well,
Yeah.
it was stuck to its friend.
So
So that's,
are they
oh,
both able to
sorry,
be
go ahead.
saved when that happens, or
They were dead by the time they came out,
okay?
Mhm.
unfortunately. And I don't know, they weren't very long dead. I did see one calf one time it had 8 legs, so it was kind of conjoined to like part of another calf. And that one was still alive, but it didn't live very long. It's pretty hard for them to be mothered, etc. And sometimes for humane reasons, you end up putting
Yeah,
them down
right.
just to make
Yeah.
sure that they don't live a sad life. Um, I did see one animal last year that was a yearling with an extra leg attached to its back. So it
It was a
definitely can
yearling?
happen. Yes, and there actually is someone on TikTok who has I don't know where they're out of, but they have a calf with a extra foot coming out of its head. And the reason I noticed it is I follow some stuff on bovine hoof trimming because we have a tilt table, and they had trimmed all 5 of the feet because the toes were getting too long, and they had to trim the toes on the extra foot on its head. It lives at a sanctuary somewhere. So if you look for that on
Oh
on
Wow.
my
the internet,
God.
you will find it.
Yeah, I was gonna ask about that. I didn't know if it was the same thing or not, but it's like you got two cows and the one gets absorbed by the other in the uterus, but it doesn't absorb the whole cow. So sometimes you get a couple legs sticking out of it somewhere, or the back end is hanging out of the gut or the body of the cow. So that's interesting stuff.
Wow.
I didn't know you could flip them
Yeah,
inside out though.
embryology is pretty wild. Yeah, and there's a lot of things that can go wrong. I've seen hydrocephalus as well, where there's water on the brain.
Hmm.
Those are really hard to get out of the cow, and they're really hard on the cow, and they're not going to live because their brain tissue is abnormal, right? So definitely all of those things can be bad. We've had some uterine torsions this year. Those are probably my least favorite emergency just because they're so hard. And if you imagine, I should have brought one in here and I completely forgot to, but if you imagine a tennis ball in a sock, if the sock is the the uterus and the
Uh-huh.
tennis ball is the fetus, and then you twist it, that can
Right.
happen inside the cow. And so people reach in and they call and they say, she's not dilated, but I see afterbirth, she's been pushing. I feel like she should be dilated. It's probably a torsion. If you reach in and you feel like you can just kind of barely get through, but your hand is going this
Hmm.
way or that way, and
Hmm.
it's really tricky to undo a torsion. You have 2 options really, and a lot of the time the time people find them, the calf is long dead. So a C-section is not always the best thing because that exposes the cow's insides to quite a bit more bacteria. Ideally, I like to try to untwist them. However, they're really hard. You actually have to lay the cow down and try to roll her to catch up with her uterus, or you can use a detorsing rod, but you have to be able to get both hands on both feet onto a chain and then twist the calf to again untwist that uterus around the calf, so to speak. The third option is to do a C-section, but it's very hard to exteriorize the calf, and so you have to kind of flip the uterus first inside the cow. I did that recently, and it was a little more work than a normal C-section, and then you really want to try to keep that gook out of the cow because the uterus is an external organ. I know that sounds bizarre, but what I mean by that is the uterus is meant to contact the outside world and be exposed to some things you can find outside, whereas the peritoneum, the area all around the organs inside, is meant to be incredibly sterile. And so it really doesn't have the same defenses. Actually, I stole this from Dr. Alex. This is a visual cow because we had some questions that I thought might be relevant. But like you can see her uterus, right, would contact the outside world, but all the area here, like around her organs, that all needs to be much more sterile.
Wow. Okay. This has been awesome. And the fact that we now have props today, too, is even better. So, for those of you all sorts of things that have been going on with cattle this year. Now, I did have some questions that were sent in by listeners that we should probably get to. One of them had to be, and this one we've been waiting for a little bit. I called it a choker, but apparently that's not what it is. It's CHOKKAR if you have bloat on a cow. Can you explain a little bit? Why is there bloat? What are you doing with this thing? What's its placement, Emily?
The cow has a boat?
I think maybe you mean trocar.
Trocar sounds probably right.
Okay, perfect. So bloat in general, I should start with bloat. So when people are talking about bloat, generally what they mean is ruminal bloat. That the rumen of the cow, so the stomach, this is why I had to borrow this.
This is so good.
So the stomach right here, right, is so big that the left side of the cow gets huge, and we've got this perceivably gas. However, a lot of bloats are misdiagnosed, and everyone seems to think they have a gas bloat and they need to stab it right away if the side of the cow gets even a little bit big. And I want to caution with the think first, then pop the bloat. Let's think about why first, because I have had people plop bloats that it probably would have been better if they had waited or talked to a vet or done something differently. But there are times when absolutely running up next to a cow and putting a trocar in could save their life.
Okay.
So it's important to be able to discern which. I highly recommend, rather than taking medical advice from this video, that if anybody is seriously considering doing this and they don't know what they're doing, that they talk to their regular veterinarian, because it may depend a little bit on their skill set, their operation. But I can certainly give the basics. So there are a lot of different reasons for bloat. And the first thing you have to decide is this bloat primary or secondary? Meaning, is this animal bloated because it's just bloated, got too much feed, something really basic? Or is it bloated secondary to something else? Is its GI system not working anymore because it has a stasis, because it has pneumonia and it's pressing on its vagus nerve, or because of some other factor? So I think that's really important, first of all, in deciding if doing an intervention like this is going to solve anything. The second thing is, how urgent is this? In my opinion, trocarization is almost never as good as doing a bloat surgery. So I can actually do this surgically in a way that's going to, almost like the fistula that we were discussing last time on the cow.
Yep.
To put that window in, we can do a very small version of that, like this on a feeder. And what we would be doing essentially is making a small hole that's going to last a while. It's going to last a month and start to close up slowly as the animal grows, and give it time, if its gastrointestinal system is not working correctly, to correct that issue. But generally, when people say bloat, they're thinking about too much gas in the rumen, and that can cause other issues. It can choke things off. There's a lot of reasons why it would make an animal not do well. And there are times where animals are laying over on their sides and they start to bloat up and then they can't breathe. Those are all really relevant reasons to use a trocar. So if we were going to use trocar, which first, right, we've decided that we have a real gas bloat, which you can sometimes tell by knocking on the side of the animal. You should be able to feel at the top of the rumen, if you're knocking on the side, kind of behind the rib cage, you should be able to feel gas, then maybe a fiber mat, and then a fluid mat. And so if you feel this is all fluidy up here, there's no difference. Maybe you don't have any gas in there. Maybe this animal's so full of fluid, it's probably not going to help to just trocarize it. I also always recommend putting a tube down orally instead of putting a trocar in, if you have the time to do it. So if you have the time and you don't think this animal's, breathing his last breath, so to speak, you could have time to maybe get this animal in. You can use a frick speculum or a PVC pipe and a tube, like a nice hose, not a garden hose with a metal end, but pretty much just a hose. And you can go down orally into the rumen and let the gas off manually. And I generally recommend that because that is atraumatic. Also, you're not going to worry about missing the room. So when people decide to trocarize a bloat, if we decided that that's not an option, we're not going to the vet, and we think this is a gas bloat, all three of which conditions I would want to satisfy before I did this. This is a red trocar.
Okay.
Now, some people just do this with a knife. There's a good reason not to do that.
Okay.
And the reason is, even if this rumen here is bloated, right? So the rumen is this yellow thing here, and it's bloated up enough that it is up against the edge of this cow now, right? Even if that's true, the problem is when you pop it, it's going to start to deflate. And we just said earlier when we were talking about the torsions that juices from the stomach should not be in the peritoneum because that's a sterile area.
Uh-huh.
So when we do that, if we don't connect the stomach layer that we've just cut into to the outside of the cow that we just cut into, we run the risk of that stomach deflating in there like a deflating water balloon and draining into the peritoneum of the cow, which is a big problem. It creates adhesions later. It stinks for me when I try to revisit the surgery that you've done. So if it's going to save something's life, I'm not going to tell you can never use a knife. But if you do, there could be consequences later. So really weigh that decision very closely. Ideally, what you have is one of these. So this, it's not quite as good as a surgery, but it does help screw the two together.
Justin's stomach
So
hurts.
this is a red plastic trocar. They're really cheap, and I advise my clients not to use this pokey end to try to
poke through the hide.
do what you need to do because it won't go through the hide very easily. I generally recommend cutting a small slit with a scalpel and then going through the hide with this. Now this has two pieces. One piece is designed to screw in, and so you pop this in first, and then you quickly screw this in, and you want to get that little second layer, right, adhered to the first layer. So now you can put your two layers together. They're stuck together inside of cow to outside of cow.
Okay.
And then you pull this out, and this stays indwelling, but the air can come out through the hole. And the advantage to that is you don't have, now we've got our rumen is still stuck to the outside of our cow. So we have a direct hole into the rumen, and we don't have random rumen juice just deflating like a dirty deflating balloon into the abdomen of this poor cow and spilling everywhere.
And less likelihood for infection,
people,
right? At the same time?
Exactly.
Okay.
So, and also less likelihood that it's going to close back up. Because that could happen too, right? It could just kind of close back up. I have had some that have adhered really grossly. So like it's deflated too much, and then there's also adhesions, and people come in and they say, yeah, I stabbed it twice and it still doesn't look good. Can you do the surgery now?
Oh my God.
I've done it, right? But it didn't really solve anything, unfortunately. It's not really the greatest situation. And I'm not saying, look, I don't want you to let something die because you can't get me on the phone, but just, go through that little checklist of like, okay, how urgent is this really? Which some of that decision making comes with time, but some of it you can also see like, is the animal still up walking around? Like, at that point, do I think I can get a tube down it? Sometimes you get a tube down a bloat and they never bloat again. And then you're like, well, it's fine. I usually tell clients, try to use a tube and let the gas off once or twice. If it keeps coming back, let me do the surgery. And then I'll do a surgery on these calves. And they usually do quite well and close up, and it's not really a big deal.
So I've actually seen these videos or some videos of what she's explaining on Facebook or whatnot. And it literally looks like a balloon is inside the cow. And this dude walked up to it. He just gave it a quick little shank.
Oh, God.
And if you took like an air compressor and you were releasing all the air inside of it, that's what it sounded like, and it just didn't stop. It was just
and if only
how
you'd been there,
uncomfortable.
because that's
Yeah. Go ahead.
if only you were there, because that's almost pure methane, so it really stinks.
So don't light a cigarette, you're telling me.
Yeah, it really, really smells. So just like don't forget that either. And sometimes if you get real lucky, it bubbles and it kind of like sprays out.
That's wildly
Real
inappropriate.
lucky.
Oh, there are people in offices listening to the show today all across Fargo Moorhead who are just going, what is happening?
Bubbles and spray and
Oh, yeah, I can't imagine.
I love it.
Oh, that would be wild.
Oh man, can you imagine?
That's wildly inappropriate.
Okay, now that we are all just...
Dean, what are you thinking
Dean
right
can't
The
now?
only
talk.
thing I could think of is you're stuck in an outhouse and it tips over, and that's what it's like.
One time I had a bad enough calving, I decided to use the dog skunk shampoo because I thought that it would get the dead calf smell off of me.
Oh,
I
no.
had really, really irritable skin. I still smelled, and I had eczema for a while.
Oh.
So yeah, I definitely would say that is fairly close to some of our days, unfortunately.
Holy.
Yeah.
Wow.
You just burn those clothes. You don't actually try to keep them at the end of those days, I bet. Yeah, just throw them away.
Oh.
Wow.
My washing machine has fancy stain settings, and it has one for chocolate, but I think they actually mean feces because I'm assuming that's how I use it.
I was going to say, does it have a cow setting?
Manure.
I assume that's what they really meant by chocolate's just the nicer word.
Right.
Oh my God!
I'd say that's probably true. Oh, okay. We have just like 3 minutes left, Emily. And I did have someone ask, what is crypto in cows? I told Justin this does not mean they have a wallet.
Yeah,
So-
Dogecoin.
No, they don't. So,
No.
okay, what
No,
are we
no, no.
talking about with crypto in cows?
Moocoin?
So crypto, they mean Cryptosporidium parvum. It is a single-celled organism. So it's not really a bacteria, but it's not a virus. It's kind of like those little single-celled flagellates and stuff that you may have looked at in school. Kind of like Giardia would be another example.
Okay.
Crypto is something that baby calves tend to get. It's usually passed, it seems to be passed a lot in wet conditions. And if they get it, unfortunately, they get really, really, really bad diarrhea.
Oh,
It has a high morbidity and fairly low mortality rate generally. And what that means is it's very, very good at spreading. It can kill a lot of calves, and I've seen it kill a lot of calves for a variety of reasons, but it doesn't always, it's not sudden death. You do have a little bit of time, but it requires a tremendous amount of supportive care to get them through. So you can imagine one guy, he's got this very, very, very easy to spread thing that can spread on your clothes. It can spread very, very easily. It's fecal oral. So, it can spread very, very easily. And now he's got, first you've got 3 calves, then you have 6, then pretty soon, I did have one herd where it was a third of the herd that was infected, and they did lose a lot of calves. So it's very tricky, and there's no approved drug in the US for it. There's one in Canada. I'm unclear on how well it works. But I have seen people lose a lot of calves because they just cannot keep up. These calves need constant drenching with electrolytes. When I say supportive care, I mean their immune system has to clear it, but you have to keep them going long enough that they don't die of dehydration or something else before they can clear it. They also tend to get secondary infections because it really bites up their colon. So the other thing about crypto that's crucial to understand is that it's zoonotic, meaning people can get it.
oh,
People can get it. So it's really, really important in general when you're playing with baby calves particularly, but any animal, right? Like it's really important that we like wash our hands and not put them in our mouths, all of that stuff, right? Don't get poop in your mouth is really important. But it's hard when you're working in an agricultural industrial setting, right? Because it's a little more complicated when stuff's splashing everywhere. I have had crypto before. And it's a very unpleasant disease for humans as well. I do know people who have been hospitalized for it. And it's not particularly pleasant. And it's really important, especially if you have little kids, immunocompromised people. I believe crypto still kills a fair amount of people with unclean water supplies who are immunocompromised with HIV/AIDS. I could be wrong on that. That's not a fact, but I'm pretty sure. So it's really important that you make sure that we're washing our hands, use good hand hygiene anytime we have scouring calves, because we don't know for sure, right? And it's really important to also be really aware of who is helping. If you have somebody in your family who's undergoing cancer treatment or little kids, people with not great immune systems, it is really important to be conscientious of that.
And Emily, the bird flu has been expanding for throughout the globe, I guess. And is there any worry that this, of this getting into, the cows, calves, anything like that, or is that really not
like the cow passing it on to the calf, you mean?
Yeah.
Oh,
I mean, is this going to be a problem down the road here? Are we expecting that or no?
I mean, on an animal to animal level, it has caused some decreased production in some dairy cows in I think about 11 states now. High path avian influenza, H5N1, I believe, has been around for a while, right? And like anything, it's a migratory bird disease. And so any migratory bird disease is going to spread pretty easily. The jump to cows, anytime anything jumps from one species to another, obviously it's concerning. In terms of concerns for animal health, there are some. USDA is addressing them appropriately, in my opinion. So far, we've only seen it in dairy cows. They do have some testing in place and some testing requirements. It hasn't been found with a ton of animals, but it causes decreased milk production, possibly some fertility issues. It's more a concern of also the risk to human health, right? And while we don't know that for certain yet, from what I understand, and again, I don't work for USDA, so I'm not privileged to a lot of the information that they have. But from what I understand, there have been a few people who have had possible transmissions, but it's very, very rare. It did not come through animal products. These are people who were directly involved in the day-to-day lives of these animals and really spending a lot of time with them. I'm not even overtly concerned for my own health. It's really migratory birds. I would be, I'm more worried about that overall, migratory birds have it. My dogs have pulled a ton of dead geese this year into our yard that they've found that have died of and that were symptomatic. I mean, it was in our area quite badly. That being said, obviously things like this are always of a concern. Some people who believe strongly against raw milk would argue that this is a good reason for pasteurization. They have not found any, they've been testing milk because they've only found it in dairy cows right now. They have been testing milk. No live virus has been found in any milk samples or anything, and they are constantly monitoring that. But it's a good reason to make sure that you are comfortable with the temperatures you're cooking things to, the sources you're getting things from. All of those things are things to always consider in the face of an outbreak of an animal disease like this.
What about we got like a minute left, but what about when it comes to fatality of bird flu in cattle and procedures if someone's cows end up getting bird flu? Is there something special you're supposed to do? Like your bird flocks have got to get euthanized. I'd imagine you're not doing that with cows, but do you have any info on that?
I don't have a lot because our state hasn't been affected yet, and I haven't had any worries about that. We did have some flocks that had to be depopped in
Mm-hmm.
our community. What I do understand, I believe they are quarantined and tested. I'm not sure, and I know they cannot ship any animal products. I think those products are going out of the food chain for sure, but I do not know exactly how they're dealing with the animals themselves. Sometimes, depending on the pathogen in general, the policy of USDA, sometimes there have been things that involve depopulation, right? They did that with cows, for example. If you have, when they had FMD in England, for example, they did that with cows, right? It is something that they'll do. But in this case, I don't think that it's nearly reached that point. I have a feeling they're going to do quarantine and test. That's usually the most common way that they handle these things. And we do have a very robust system in place for dealing with foreign animal disease and traceability, actually being able to find animals that come up at slaughter with disease. Like TB traceability in this country is very good in comparison to other countries.
I see.